Welcome to this final episode of Just Liberty with Professor David VanDrunen. I'm enjoying talking about some of these weightier matters of the law. They're so important. I mean, when you think about the foundation of a house, if that foundation is not sound and solid, you can have all sorts of things built on top of it that aren't, that might be glorious, but when the earthquake hits in California or when the hurricane hits in Florida or what have you, it may be destroyed. Now, it's not just the foundation that matters, but the foundation's awfully important, isn't it? And I think we've been talking about a lot of foundational things when it comes to law and thinking about it. One of the things that I wanted to talk with you about is that thinking about, as a Christian, about law and how does theology interact, how do the scriptures interact, my understanding of your view is that you don't think there's a simple one-to-one correspondence. The Bible gives a command in the Mosaic Law a certain way. We are not to just cut and paste that into the U.S. Code or into the Virginia statutes or what have you. Do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. I mean, that might be a head-scratching sort of one if we were to attempt to do something along those lines. But as I understand it from this morning, you do think that there are moral principles that could be derived, even if there might be a civil or ceremonial aspect to it that may not apply in applying it to this society, for example. Yeah. Is that a fair characterization of your view?
Yeah. It is, yeah. I think it is very important to recognize that the law of Moses was given to Old Testament Israel. It was given as part of God's covenant with them, and it was designed to govern their life as a holy people to God in their promised land. And we today are not under that covenant, and we're not in that same relationship with God that Old Testament Israel was. And so I think that's just a basic reason why we can't, it's not just a one-to-one thing, as you were saying. We can't just take something out of that law and just assume without further question that, oh, this is something that I should do, or this is something that my society as a whole should do. But
is that true in the New Testament as well? In the sense that as Christians, are there certain commands that are given to us as Christians that aren't necessarily for being prescribed to become the law of the land in a society of not just Christians?
I think that's right. And I think it's important to note that the New Testament never gives a kind of a civil code. There's no New Testament equivalent of the Mosaic Law, in other words. And I think that makes sense, that the New Testament was not preparing the way for some sort of Christian equivalent of the Mosaic Israelite state. And so, yeah, there are all sorts of things that the New Testament says that are geared for us as Christians, and that make sense for us.
Like taking communion.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's a very good one. Right? Yeah. This only makes sense for those who have faith in Christ, who are united to Christ, and in that case, there are actually severe warnings, like if
not to.
You shouldn't.
If you're not
and so. And so I think we always need to be sensitive when we're reading Scripture, is who is this for, and what are the rationales for it. Yeah. But going back to the Mosaic Law, so I'm a minister in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. We subscribe to the Westminster Confession of Faith, and there's a great statement in chapter 19 of the Westminster Confession, which, speaking about these what it calls these judicial laws of the Old Testament, that they expired with the ending of that old covenant, but the general equity of those laws continues to be obligating for us. And so,
would an example be like certain things about the safety of how buildings are made, that there are some specific Mosaic commands there, that perhaps a current version of some of those principles can be some of the building codes that are going on that appropriate some of those principles, if not the exact parameters of what the Mosaic Law says there? Would that be fair?
I think that's right. Yes. Okay. Yeah. There's. I think you could say that you find within the Mosaic Law, you find things that are very particular to Israel and their particular situation as God's holy covenant people. But you also find a lot of stuff that is, you might say, common to human societies. There are laws about murder and personal injury and contracts and property, the kind of categories that we have. And I think there is a lot that we can see. So personal safety, yes, there are laws about personal safety. Right. And they may be geared for that particular culture and that particular time. But we see that there's a general equity of those laws. In some way, there are underlying principles of justice in those laws. And you can see that, I think, for laws with theft, for example, or laws with murder, for example. These are not things that were unique to Israel. These are things that every human society needs to have law that governs property and personal injury and safety. And so, I think there is a lot of wisdom and insight. And you and I were having a conversation with one of your colleagues just before coming here about how the Mosaic Law distinguishes between different kinds of murder based on the intent and the knowledge. And our own American law has something similar. It's not
degrees of murder,
it's not identical.
manslaughter, degrees of manslaughter.
That's right.
And state by state, it's not exactly the same.
That's right. And not that we need to do it exactly the way the Mosaic Law does it, but we do see there are certain principles of justice that someone who accidentally kills someone is not the same as someone who willfully kills somebody. Right. And so I think there are a lot of examples of that where we can see, there is a real wisdom in those ancient laws.
Right. The Reformer Melanchthon talked about the Ten Commandments as being foundational for any society's laws. In earlier American history, there was a very live debate between the first and the second table. Is it both tables? In other words, are just the commands pertaining to how you treat your fellow humans, or does it extend to the commands that might be considered primarily Godward in its focus? What are your views in regards to that question?
It seems to me that it is the concerns of the second table that are the principal concern of our civil law.
Meaning primarily towards fellow humans.
Yes, that's right. That our law is about adjudicating our relationships and trying to rectify the wrongs that we do to each other. Certainly our churches have jurisdiction about our spiritual lives, our relationship to the Lord. And I think there are some good theological reasons, as well as our historical American reasons, to say that we really don't want our civil magistrates to be making those judgments about what's heretical and what's not, what's blasphemous and what's not, what is the right way to worship God, what's the right day to worship God. If I think about my governor or my president, I'm not sure I really want those people to be making those decisions. And I think if we are going to have a peaceful society, and I think a just and peaceful society, that we should have our civil magistrates recognize the limits of their jurisdiction, and they don't extend as far as making those sorts of what we might think of as theological or religious determinations.
And yet you are in favor, are you not, of like a robust Christian engagement as a legitimate calling in government, in law, as the Lord calls a person at the same time, right?
That's right, yeah. Okay. There are, I think it's wonderful that the Lord has, He's called Christians all sorts of vocations. Yeah. and all sorts of different areas of life in which we can be engaged, and we try to make a contribution. We try to promote the excellence and truth and justice of the beauty of things and wherever the Lord has placed us. And I would say that being called to public office or some other sort of civil work is those are among the legitimate vocations that God has set before us. And now those,
I think that was a huge Reformation recovery, by the way.
I think yes.
In terms of
that's right.
Not just monastic life, not just the priestly or pastoral life. There are callings beyond those two.
That's right. I mean, it's not as if none of the Christians weren't doing other things before then, but there was this really sense that, like, a vocation meant you were called to be a priest or a nun or something. And I think it really was very helpful for the Reformation to say, actually, no, that God calls all of us to a variety of things. And we can honor God and we can serve our neighbor doing all sorts of things. And sure, there are certain dangers that will come for those who are heavily involved in politics or running for office. They need to be on guard against those temptations that seeking power, holding power can sometimes offer. That can be a real temptation, so we need to be careful about that. But at the same time, I think we need to say that there is real good that can happen when people who are in office actually seek what's right and seek to be fair and equitable in their work. That's a real blessing for the people who are the beneficiaries of that.
Yeah. So a Christian can pursue equal justice under law, the words emblazoned on our Supreme Court, as a Christian, as a committed Christian, if so called by the Lord, and to do it Christianly, albeit hopefully with a sound understanding of what that means.
That's right. Yeah, I think that they can do that as Christians, as those who believe they are pleasing the Lord as they are doing this. And yet, part of what they're doing is they're not just serving their fellow Christians; they're actually serving, hopefully, all of their neighbors and trying to give them what is just, and trying to hopefully incorporate them into this quest for a more just and equitable society.
Well, it's good to talk with you, and I'm glad you could come.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and that concludes our series of episodes with Professor David VanDrunen. Hope you've enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you in future episodes.